Okay, so I'm playing some heads up. Alright, so I'm playing some 2 table 25 cent 50 cent heads up against my friend Mike Peezy. And Mike and I have enormous history, so there may be some I'm hoping there will be some unusual spots and kind of interesting dynamic here. um, let's see, I guess generally I feel like his leaks are that he flats too much out of position. He probably flats 3-bet too much, and I think he definitely flats 4-bet too much. Um, he likes to float and play back post flop a ton, so I spend, when I'm playing well against him, which is not always, but when I am playing well against him, I tend to spend kind of exaggerated amounts of time in a tag gear because he's kind of always anticipating that I'm going to adjust into a lag gear and try to use my tight image to get folds in weird spots. So because he thinks I'm going to always tend toward doing that, I am going to play pretty tag a lot of the time against him. But he likes to make some goofy hero calls on occasion, but he tends to be pretty good about doing it when I'm actually in like a laggy gear and spots where I can be bluffing. So that's why I try to play more tag against him recently than I used to. That could change in the future, but here I'm check calling and donking half pot with top pair. I think it'll look like I maybe picked up a diamond draw or just a 10 or something. And then the draw is missed on the river, so I'm going to pot it for value and try to represent a bluff. This is also a good spot to balance half pot with value, but I feel like here I really particularly want to represent a bluff and get called down by like a worse jack. He folds, that's fine now. He 3x's buttons, and he probably does that with, I think he's opening the button wider than I am, generally. I think he's opening something like 80 to 90% of buttons. And anyway, so, whoops, I didn't mean to min raise there. Oh, didn't go through. Cool. And what? This glitchy site. Okay, so I min raised by accident, but that's okay. So I'm gonna 3-bet him generally merged because he flats. I think his biggest mistakes are calling early streets too much against strong ranges and bigger sizes. Against his 3x on the button, like I said, I'm going to 3-bet very merged, and I'm not going to defend a whole lot in general. Like, I'm probably going to defend between 30 and 40% of hands. So I'm probably flatting maybe 20% and 3-betting 15 to 20%. Somewhere in there. If he were min-raising, I'd be defending a lot more, but he doesn't like to min-raise the button, so I will not 4-bet him very much at all, except with like mostly premiums, because he flats 4-bet too often, as I mentioned earlier. Sometimes I get into a dynamic where I check raise him a lot on the flop because he's c-betting too much, but recently he's been backing off his c-bets to kind of avoid that, so that may not come up. I think 2 spots where he folds too often are, one when I flat out of position and lead half pot on the flop, which I do somewhat often against him, because he has a really wide button raising range, and he knows I don't really flat a wide range at all against his 3x. I can get away with him just exploitatively folding ace high because I think early in the match he's going to at least fire a couple barrels to try to like establish some dynamic. Oops, I accidentally min-raised again. So anyway, the reason I 3x buttons against him, and I'm doing it with a range of probably, when I'm playing tight, it's probably in the 60%, 65% range. Maybe a 70%, just somewhere in the 60 to 70 range. And that's the gear I'm in more often than not now. When I'm playing a laggier gear, I'm opening more like 80 to 90% of buttons. But I'm very rarely opening 100% of buttons against him because one of his major leaks is that he just defends too much in general. And he does back off post-flop a fair bit, but I still feel like he defends too much against my 3x, even if I do it with a tight range, so therefore I should be raising a tight range on the button. I'm not going to lead here because I think he gives it a lot of credit. Instead I may just, well, I was going to make my first check raise probably there. But I'll just lead half pot on the turn when he checks back flop. I think another potential leak he may have is that his check back flop range is very weak, almost always. Like, especially if I 3-bet and check the flop and he checks back, his rate of folding to the turn lead there is really high. And the other spot I was going to say that I think he may fold too much is when... Sorry, one sec. Oh yeah, when I 3-bet and then c-bet pot on the flop, I do that with a very low frequency, and I think that he folds too much to it. So I tend to do that mostly with air, and then just either check the flop to trap or half pot if I have a value hand. Of course, you know, if he watches this video, then that may change because he may adjust to it. But I told him about it, and I don't think he's really adjusted to it much. So he must not want to play around with trying to re-exploit me in that spot. Because he knows I can then just adjust my pot range to be strong hands, and then he's going to be paying off a lot against a really strong range, and I guess he doesn't want to go into that level, so... And on a side note, yes, this is a play money site, but we're just playing on here to avoid rake. We know each other in person, and we pay cash to each other, so this is actually a real 25-cent, 50-cent money match. Still small stakes, pretty small, obviously, but it's not just play money, so that does factor into the psychology some. Here I flop the nuts, and over here I flop top paired weak kicker and just check flop. I check call this spot a lot to balance out my check call range, so that I don't always just have like weak bluff catchers when I check call after 3-betting. If I don't balance this spot with like top pair and some monsters, then Mike will just barrel me to death whenever I 3-bet and check flop, which I don't want to happen because I like to 3-bet, you know, moderately wide against him, but I don't want to just c-bet all willy-nilly into him because, like I said, he loves to float and play back a whole lot. Here I just lead half pot on a turn for value slash thin value slash protection. And just pot my straight over here. Hope he thinks I'm bluffing. Because the ace turn could be like a reverse scare card. Where, you know, he thinks I think it's a really good bluffing card, so it can make him call more often. Oh, and I get a really good river over here. So I'll just bomb. He'll probably fold, but I think he's going to be inelastic in this spot, which is why I'm going to tend to bet big with value and small with bluffs, unless some other factor becomes more important. Like if a certain leveling dynamic happens or something, then he probably has the case ace. Yeah, we're chopping. I can't imagine he'd ever shove there with worse than the case ace. I don't defend ace-x offsuit against 3x as a general rule. I only do it against like kind of weakish tag players that tend to one and done too much or just not c-bet at all and just check all the way down a lot. Because then ace high is good on dry boards for 0 barrels or 1 barrel. But especially against Mike, who likes to bet and likes to barrel, I just don't defend a very wide range. Like jack 8 offsuit is sometimes defendable against 3x. Against like a real wide range, especially if it's a player that like gives up to you predictably in a lot of post flop spots. but against Mike, he's a good player, and we have a lot of history, and I just don't feel like I can really get away with flatting that wide against his 3x. I would definitely flat Jack 8 off if he were min-raising, but he's not. He almost never does. Unless stacks get like below 40 big blinds or so, in which case min-raising becomes necessary by virtue of stack size before any other concerns. So anyway, not any particularly interesting hands so far. Just kind of, I think he's playing a little more solid right now than he does some of the time. He makes his first half pot lead that I can recall, and I just fold. So I have nothing. Something I'm trying to work on against him is kind of recognizing that a lot of the time, in fact, like I feel like even too often in No Limit, against certain players, the only way to really level them is to show up with stronger range than they expect you to have. So being able to level them correctly is sort of dependent on getting cards. But if they're going to always anticipate you going into a laggy gear, then you should just stay in a tag gear until they finally learn and stop playing you as if you're playing lag. So, you know, I'm still 3-betting a lot of suited broadways, like upper mid suited connectors, things like that, suited aces, just to keep my 3-betting range from getting too nitty. Because he is smart enough to start folding to 3-bet if I just do it extremely nitty. Okay. I'll get in a little bit. Okay, I'll reboil the water then. Well, looks like browser crashed. I'm sorry? I'll just pause for a second while I get the game back up. Okay, here we are again. Missed one or two hands there, but nothing significant. I'm going to 3-bet 7-6 suited because I have a pretty low 3-betting frequency so far, and that's a reasonable drawing hand to do it with. It's an okay flop for me. I'm going to half pot it for thin value / protection. Because he has a pretty wide range here and doesn't have a queen very often. It's reasonable to think I could have the best hand sometimes. He peels flop. I can't really keep betting on a king unless I'm going to fire all three and try to represent something on the river, but it's going to represent a lot of draws, and if the draws don't complete on the river, I won't be able to barrel, so I just kind of give up on the turn here. Unless he bets really small, and then I check call. course, we have no reason to bet the river now. The showdown value. Or I half pot the river with a weak flush on a 4 flush board. I think it's just hard for him to fold any diamond to half pot. I think he would fold substantially more to pot, so that's why I'm betting small with value at this point. Because his range is elastic. I think the general principle I find is that against an elastic range, you should tend to bet smaller with value and bigger with bluffs. Assuming, you know, your opponent is reasonably adjusting his calling ranges to your sizing. And if you're against an inelastic range, then you should bet small with bluffs and big with value. So you end up doing both some of the time based on your assumptions about your opponent's range elasticity. For anyone that doesn't know what that means, an elastic range is one that changes appropriately with the size of the bet that it's facing. But an inelastic range changes either little or none, changes relatively little against the bet sizing that it faces. So if you can figure out whether your opponent's continuing range is elastic or inelastic in a given spot, that will give you a lot of clues as to how to find the optimal bet sizes against them. This was a min-raised pot. I lead turn with a weak pair and not flush draw. Because again, his check-back flop range is really weak, a very large portion of the time. I think he used to, I mean, he and I have played probably, 500,000 hands together, heads up. So there's a ton of history, and he used to check back flop raise turn with a lot of his strong hands, but I think he found that I wasn't leading turns often enough anymore. And now we're in a phase where I can lead turn a lot against him when he checks back flop in both single raised and 3-bet pots, because he just gives up tremendously often. I think because he wants to stay aggressive and keep the top of his range in his aggressive lines all the time. Not all the time, but a really, really high portion of the time. And I don't know that that's necessarily the best way to play it against me, but he's certainly up on me a substantial amount over time, so I guess whatever he's been doing has been working out. But I think I'm starting to figure out his leaks a little better than I used to. They're mostly pre-flop, honestly. He's a pretty solid post-flop player, and he's not afraid to make hero calls in spots when he's just got a read that I'm on a bluff, and like he'll definitely do that more than I will. I like to float him a good bit too, especially against his half-pot bets, as I should. But I don't feel that I float and play back post-flop as much as he does, because he's probably better than me post-flop. But I think my pre-flop game is better than his, so as long as I stay on top of keeping my pre-flop ranges well calculated and, well oiled, and play okay at least post-flop, I think I'll have a small edge. Usually if I get into like a super aggressive, 3, 4, 5 betting battle against him, I lose because I feel like he adjusts better in those spots than I do, so my primary approach is going to be fairly conservative unless we get to a point where, like, I've played nitty for so long that, I should say until we get to a point where I've played nitty for so long that he just always exploitatively folds to me and doesn't expect me to adjust into a lag gear to take advantage of that. So like I said, defending probably between 30 and 40% out of position against his 80 to 90% 3x on the button. I think that's theoretically a little bit too wide to be 3xing. Mike likes to open the button real wide most of the time, and I think he might, against a good player, he might be doing it too often for that sizing. Whereas if he were min raising, he could certainly get away with opening like 90% of buttons. That's pretty standard, but 3x is a little bit different. Here flat 3-bet with deuces, just looking for a set because it's less than, well, it's almost exactly 10% of stacks pre-flop. But I don't think he c-bets this board without something. And the only way I can float here is if I'm like really, really sure that he's going to just give up turn and river on a whole lot of runouts. So I just kind of make an exploitative fold. Because I don't know how many barrels he's going to fire, and I think it's unlikely to be just one. And I know I can't call down all three. That would be kind of absurd at this point. His frequencies aren't too high, and he's not really getting out of line much thus far. Neither of us is. I think he's adjusting to my tag gear at this point. But I'm going to still stay in it for a while, because he's also going to be looking for like inflection points where I might decide to adjust into a lag gear, and he's going to be trying to anticipate me doing that. So I think, given our history and the fact that I've played a lot of like laggy, weird strategies against him in the past, his perception is kind of that I will never really go that long without shifting into a lag gear. At which point he can exploit me with like hero calls and like rebluffs and things like that. So in order to like counter that perception and play in a way that he doesn't expect, I'm gonna have to just stay in a tag gear for a really long time until he starts to question the perception that I will always adjust to lag at some point. Jack 10 suited is a very standard 3-bet for me, heads up. I'm almost always 3-betting it. I guess I might flat it against like a really aggro 4-better, or if I had a really short stack that doesn't support 3-betting very well. You just half pot the draw here. It's also fine to pot this spot, and sometimes I do. Like, my potting range tends to consist of, well, actually against Mike it's exploitative, it consists mostly of air. But I also, my next favorite hand to do it with would be a good draw like this with 8 or more outs. And then if I've been doing it a lot, like if I've been potting the flop a lot, then I'll change out the air from my potting range into nut hands to level in. And so that sizing approach seems to work pretty well against him. When I half pot the flop, he floats with more hands that I can barrel off on the turn, which is cool because it kind of builds more dead money for me to take down. And I also balance my half potting range as well so that I have strong hands some of the time when I do it, so it's not just easy to bluff raise me off the pot all the time when I'm underbetting. Here I hope he just thinks I have a bluff, but he doesn't raise without the king, so I just call for a chop. Turn open-ended here with my second pair. Double flush draw board. If he leads turn, I just call easily. If he checks, I probably bet half pot. Again, for thin value / protection. Against a player whose range is probably a little bit too wide in spots like this, I think half pot becomes really good in on a lot of boards because as a bluff, it only needs to work a third of the time to be profitable, or to break even, rather. But if it takes down the pot more than a third of the time, then you've already made money on that half pot bet. So I'm 3-betting any pocket pair against him, as long as we're like deep enough that it's less than 10% of stacks, because I want to be able to get stacks in much more easily when I flop a set. But against 4-bet, the first 4-bet of the match, if I have a particular reason to think that the first 4-bet of this match is going to be a bluff, then you can jam here. But I don't really think that right now. This is just a read based on what he usually does with his first 4-bet, and I think he's been making it value-centric lately, so I kind of make a very game flow specific read and fold there. I guess obviously the default play is fold, but Mike is an aggressive, like a moderately aggressive 4-better. So it kind of just depends on the psychology of whether he made his first 4-bet value or not this time. And I decided to just fold because even though it's possible to shove against an aggressive 4-betting range, I just didn't want to start off with bad momentum by shoving in a really marginal hand like that. So if you 4-bet bluff me, then that's a good play. Again, not opening garbage on the button. Like I said, I have a tighter than normal button raising range against him right now, because I'm playing pretty tag. So I'm opening between 60 and 70% of buttons, whereas against most people, against like poor players, I'm opening every button, even sometimes every button for 3x against like the worst players. But against someone good, if you want to 3x buttons, which I want to, and I guess I haven't explained why I 3x buttons against him. I do it because I think that he plays pretty well against both min raise and 3x, and in a vacuum, I want to play bigger pots in position. So I would like min raise buttons against someone that there's like a couple kinds of players I think that min raising the button is best against heads up. One of them is the type of player that bets, or that 3-bets too much and too big, kind of regardless of what size you open. And then you just contain the size of the pot and save more money by min raising and losing less money when you have to fold to their big 3-bet, which you will a lot. Here I flat 3-bet with Queen Jack offsuit. This is kind of the bottom of my flat 3-bet range here, at least of this class of hand. I just fold this flop with nothing. That's fine. Here he pots the river after checking back twice. He can have some backdoor straight or like a 5 for thin value, so I'm just going to fold. I just don't see that much air in his range there. I think he's just a lot of thin value after checking back twice and betting that river. Or the occasional like backdoored monster or something. I'm just going to check back this right now. If I had 2 overs, I would probably c-bet this right now with my current image, but I just check back flop and fold turn. I also, when I check back flop and raise turn against him, that tends to be unbalanced toward value as well, because I do it, or I'm sorry, unbalanced toward bluffs. I mean, I check back flop raise turn mostly unbalanced toward bluffs because I do it at such a low frequency that he assumes I just always have it. So I don't even need to balance that line with value at the frequency I'm doing it. I can just basically have all bluffs. Another thing I like to do to try to level him is occasionally, especially if we're 100 big blinds or less deep, I like to flat big pairs and then check raise dry flops. Especially if I've got an aggressive check raise image going, which I don't right now. So, but I may try that if I pick up a big pair at some point here, just to see if I can get some check raise dynamic going or mislead him into stacking off with a weak top pair against my over pair or something like that. I have a gutter here. I just fold. I don't want to start off with check back flop raise turn, really. I want to do it after I've like check back flop and folded turn a fair bit already. just to make sure the image is strong before I try to do it with a bluff. Not opening as low as Jack 4 off right now. Again, my lag gear would be opening that hand on the button, but my tag gear is not. 6 deuce suited is almost a button open fold, but I feel like because it has a little bit of connectivity and it's suited, I can still open it on the button, especially because he's not 3-betting tremendously often right now. But I will fold it if he 3-bets, unless he does an especially small sizing. If he 3-bets like at least pot, I'll fold. He flats. I flop nothing. Can probably represent this board with a pot bet. I feel like he sees my pot bets in a lot of spots as unbalanced toward value, and where in reality they're often unbalanced toward bluffs. And here we flop the boat. We get called. I feel like I might have to turn this into a 3-barrel bluff, but he has a queen so often too. He just leads turn. I'll let him have it. I mean, I have to shove or fold here, and I think a bluff shove here with no equity is pretty bad. So here we half pot. Oh, whoops! And we accidentally min bet because this side is glitchy. Wonderful. He's going to know that's a misclick, though, because he knows I would never actually do that intentionally. Or almost never. Not against a good player, anyway. I might use it as, like, an inducing move against a maniac, but... or a probe against a fish, but... he folds anyway. That tells me he was going to fold to any size, so... Anyway, so... in that spot, I do think his continuing range is... is somewhat inelastic, but I bet small with value because I thought that he was going to, well, no, actually, I guess that means his calling range must be elastic if I did that. Here he 4-bets his second time really big with a short stack for like over a quarter of stacks. I just fold. Maybe he'll 3-bet me again when I have aces. Nope, he flats though. Better than nothing. So anyway, because I think he exploitively folds to my my pot bet so much on the flop, I end up slanting a lot of my value toward half pot or trap checking. In fact, this might be a good spot to check back flop raise turn with an unexpectedly strong hand. So I'm going to try that and see if he'll lead the turn. Unless it's his third spade, and I would not raise. But like, what I like about raising here if he leads is that I can represent trying to represent a 3. So it can look like I'm polarized to a 3 or nothing, and he can call me down light. Cool, he does in fact lead. I'm going to make the smaller raise here. I have 2 different raise sizes I use in this spot, but the smaller one I think gets a little more action. River 3's full. Third spade as well. I just pot the river here because I want a king to call, and if I like overbet, I think a king may fold. Too bad he didn't barrel the river. That would have been a good spot to value shove. But, you know. It looks like I have a king here, I think. So he could level himself into a light call. I think he did. Yeah, cool. Aces get paid. That's good. Yeah, he had the king. I think if I overshoved, he would have put me on the 3 and folded. So I like my sizing there. He's probably calling inelastically, so I want to tend toward betting big for value and small with bluffs. I call a check raise on the flop with a flush draw, but I don't get anywhere on the turn. I pick up 4 more outs, and thankfully get to check back turn. I would have had to fold to a big bet. I can represent a jack here, actually. I'm going to ship it. And he folds. Cool. I think my line makes perfect sense for a jack. And I also think that my first overbet tends to get credit from him. Especially if I don't start off the match overbetting, and then I finally make my first one after a while, he's going to tend to give it credit. He doesn't start questioning my overbets until I do them a few times in a relatively short span of time, so... He knows I like to do it with, a lot of the time that I'm doing it with a very value-biased range, so... Here I flat the small 3-bet with 7-6 off. It might be a little too wide given his short stack size, and I just fold flop. Not opening garbage. I'm not even opening some of the like weaker offsuit hands that are normally button opens against most people because, like I said, one of Mike's primary leaks is that he defends too much in general, even when my range is tight. Alright, he's taking a break real quick, so I'll just pause until we come back. Okay, back again. Yeah, so I think I've explained the game flow and the history reasonably well, and why we're in the gears we're in right now. Here I'm just protection betting bottom pair. Kind of just turning it into a bluff with the pot bet. And we take it down. Because like I said, I think he's giving my pot bets a lot of credit. Granted, he should give them more credit, generally, than he gives my half pot bets. Just mathematically, he should continue less often against a larger bet, in theory. But, that larger bet can also represent, since it tends to represent a more polarized range, it can also represent air a lot more often, so, I feel like he's not catching those spots enough. I don't like this stack depth. The SPR here is bad for me to continue, and I just have a gutter. So I'm going to check fold, because we're facing a somewhat short stack here. Here he leads flop. I make a small raise. This represents, I think this can represent draws pretty often, or just air that doesn't believe he has anything on that kind of board. I'm going to continue with a turn half pot for value, and he just folds. I expected him to fold there. I mean, I guess it's possible I could have even gotten away with a smaller bet than half pot, but I rarely ever bet less than half pot, and I rarely ever bet more than pot. Except in certain occasional overbetting spots, but those are kind of unusual. A lot of the time I'm 3-betting any suited ace, and I think most gears I'm doing that pretty often. I feel like they have enough equity and enough drawing potential to be worth a 3-bet against a wide opening range. He's 4-bet twice so far, but they were kind of far spaced out somewhat, and it's been kind of a while since he 3-bet last, or since he 4-bet, so I feel like I'll probably give a 4-bet credit here if it comes, but it doesn't. But then I hit kind of a bad flop and have nothing, so I just check fold here. This flop is coordinated enough that I can't really check call, just ace high. So it's a check fold. If I was going to barrel at this, I would have to be willing to fire off a fair number of turns and rivers with nothing, and I just don't want to right now. Still staying in a fairly tag gear. I'm trying to get him to make high variance gambles against my good hands. I want him to think that's the only way he'll be able to win substantial money from me is with high variance gambles. Here I pot with air because, again, my potting range is generally unbalanced toward air, and he calls, so I'm probably giving up. I pick up a gutter on the turn, but unless we hit the 5, nope. Easy fold to a river lead here. If he checks, we just check down because we don't rep anything at this point. Anything that liked the flop a lot would have barreled again on the turn, and anything that didn't like it enough probably wouldn't bet again on the river, so we represent nothing but bluffing here, so we just check down and give up. Yeah, he had top pair anyway. He certainly wasn't folding to just 2 barrels. He might have folded to all 3 barrels, but it's not worth it in that spot. That's just not a great board for multi-barreling. A dry ace-high board is rarely a good board for multi-barreling. I mean, barring really specific dynamic that you know they're floating ace-high boards a lot and blah blah blah, but, you know, I feel like that's not that common. He just 4-bet jams for 70 big blinds. I'm gonna fold ace-10 suited. I think I'm dominated more often than not there. Or at least flipping. I feel like I'm never dominating him. Ace-8 off, I'll just fold to a 3-bet because he's kind of short and it doesn't flop that well. I don't expect him to just one and done. It's kind of a janky ace. Here I will 3-bet King-Jack offsuit for protection. Get called. We hit a really poor flop. It's very coordinated and very much in line with his flatting range, so we're just giving up here. I'm going to check back turn kind of for pot control / deception here and then induce comfortability on the river, I should say. So 6x got there, 7-8 got there, but I still have to call with a jack, I think, for half pot. He has a better jack. That's fair. Here we flop nothing. Backdoor heart, nut heart draw, I guess. But I think that I can probably pot it and take it down a good bit. And I can barrel on heart turns or an ace turn. Actually, an ace turn I probably check back. We'll just take it down. That's good. I'm just gonna check this one back with no equity, just 2 overs. I don't want my potting frequency to get too high, because then I have to start balancing it with good hands, and I like to keep those in my small bet range a lot of the time against Mike, just so that we can get to later streets and he can try to outplay me more when I have hands. Just check down king high here and see if it's good. Yes, it is. Here I threw that ace jack suited and flop top pair. I'm just going to check this because it's a monotone flop. Normally I'd be betting half pot here. He checks it back. I think if I pot the turn, it looks absurdly strong, so I'm going to half pot turn and see if I can get called by any worse hands. He checks back flop and min raises turn. I call. That could be a flush, but we hit a bad river anyway, so now it's fairly easy to just check fold. He half pots it. Yeah, I'll let him have it on a 4th spade river. So we are slightly down on both tables by about, what, 20 big blinds. But I feel like I'm playing well, so it's all good. And unfortunately he just open folds to my aces. Again, not opening Jack 4 off right now. Some marginal open for 3x, but it's too wide against Mike, I think. Queen Jack offsuit I think is always a flat here. This time I will lead half pot because I've been doing it very little, and I meant to lead half pot, not minimum, but get raised. I guess I call with the gutter and the backdoor club draw. Turn middle pair, that's not so good. Here I'm just going to peel his lead with lead top pair. I guess I call half pot here with second pair plus gutter, although this is close to a fold. Yeah, I think he definitely has something here. So I'll let him have it. He shows busted flush draw. Nice hand. Well played on his part. I floated a little wide. Kind of got punished for it by multi-barrel. We just check down the ace. Hope we're good. Yeah, he got counterfeited on the river. That's unfortunate for him. Here I'm going to c-bet big with my open-ended, because I want to be able to threaten stacks when I get there. Turn doesn't help me at all. If I... Okay, he donks half pot on the turn. So I'm just going to peel with the open-ended and get there, and hope that he doesn't have a boat. He just has trip 10s, so my straight is good on the river. So yeah, that was an example of a spot where he knew that I was double floating wide on that type of board, even though it was kind of dry, and he was able to fire all three and represent the ace or better. So well played by him. Fortunately, I kind of coolered him the next hand with straight over trips, so that's lucky for me. King 8 off is probably like the bottom of my of that type of hand in my flatting range. Like I fold King 7 off against 3x, and okay, I get so I lead half pot merged here and get raised. Just gonna let this one go because I don't know how many barrels he's gonna fire, and I think that it's often more than one, and I don't want to call all three. And I don't want to get wrapped up in a call fold line there with the middle pair that could have just been dead against his flop raising range in the first place. So I make a semi-exploitative fold on the flop with that 8. Looking back, I don't like my lead. I think I should lead half pot more polarized than that, because it's too easy for him to raise me off the pot. So only reason to lead half pot merged like that is if your opponent like never raises at all, or it doesn't raise nearly enough. He accidentally leads min raise, min bet. I guess I call with nothing. I don't know, maybe I'm supposed to fold the min bet there. Checks turn. I'm gonna half pot it here and see if I can just take it down and give up if he doesn't fold here. He calls. River doesn't do a whole lot. Some straight draws got there. The hearts didn't get there. He did take a long time to call. That tells me he's probably on some sort of marginal hand. I'm actually going to half pot it again and try to represent thin value here. Like I'm trying to rep like a 10, like Jack 10 or something like that. And hope that, nope, he doesn't level himself into a fold. He calls with ace high. Wow. That's good. Good call. I don't entirely know how he determined my range there, but I guess he did. Nice hand. I guess he knew I was post-oaking, or he thought it was likely enough that I could be post-oaking that he could call down with ace high. So good play by him. Here I flop a gutter, and I don't feel I have enough image after that last bluff to do anything other than check fold. So I guess perhaps since I was going to check fold a lot of flops, Jack 9 suited might have played better as a flat right then. Even though I 3-bet Jack 9 suited very often, but right after getting caught on a bluff like that, I should probably just flat it, because I'm going to have to give up post flop so much. So like I said, if my stack gets down below like about 40 big blinds, I will start min-raising buttons just to adjust a stack size. Around the same point, maybe 50 big blinds, 50 to 60 big blinds, I start 3-betting a smaller sizing too. If either player, well, if the, effective stacks are that. That's just an adjustment to stack size that allows you to spread the money across the streets better, more effectively. Like I said, I think stack size should be the first concern in deciding your sizing. A lot of times stack sizes just dictate that you have to size things basically a certain way. And then beyond that, that's when you start getting sizing, leveling, and stuff into the game. Not going to defend Jack 6 suited right now. It's kind of a 3-better fold. I don't feel it's good enough to flat against 3x, and it's not a good 3-bet right now because my image is poor after getting caught bluffing recently. So. My 3-bet ace-5 suited and take it down. Unfortunately, he open folds to my kings. I'm going to be opening a little bit tighter on the button with effective stacks being like 70 big blinds over here. So like a few hands that I would open with 100 big blind stacks, I'll just open fold now. Here I'm 3-betting. We're like 80 bigs deep over here. 3-betting 9-8 suited. That's a hand I 3-bet very often as well. Just balances your range out well. Here I 3-bet King Jack offsuit for protection, and then I'm going to half pot flop. I feel like he's been checking back in our recent matches. He's been checking back flop a lot when I 3-bet and check flop. So and then he folds turn a lot after checking back flop. So I don't want to get into that spot. So instead I just bet flop. But I don't bet pot because I think he also interprets that line as super strong. So between the three kind of general lines that I have for playing the flop after I 3-bet, I've got pot, half pot, and check, and that check usually leads to a check call if he bets, and it leads to a turn lead almost always if he doesn't bet, because he folds to that so often, as I said. This is an interesting spot. I checked back flop and turned an ace. I guess I call a half pot bet on the turn, but there's like, he could have a king, he could have spades, he could have queen jack. I probably can't call down on the river. Even on a brick river. It's just so easy for him to have me beat. And he pots it. Yeah, I'm just going to let it go. His increased sizing on the river there makes it generally, theoretically correct to call and then fold more often. Because he half-potted turn and potted river. So it is possible to get a read on that as super polarized and really bluff heavy if you know the player doesn't have like a ton with bluffs. But a good player is going to balance that with value hands too. So You can't just like snap him off super light and expect to be good very much. Even though he did like small, big as sizing or whatever. Which, you know, that pattern kind of looks like somebody trying to build up a pot to steal it on a later street. But sometimes it's also just building up a pot to get more money in the pot to value bet a later street. So as long as the player is reasonably competent. I guess I'm 3-betting too big over here based on our stack size now, so I should have gone to my smaller 3-bet there. I would have lost a little bit less, but minor mistake. Yeah, we're short on... this. Effective stacks are short on both tables now, so I'm going to be adjusting a little bit by, like I said, taking out some of the weaker lower hands, like getting rid of like lower suited connectors and stuff, because the shorter the stacks, the more important it is to have high card value so that you can win at showdown. Because the shorter the stacks, the more often showdown happens. Seems like the software might be frozen or something here. Alright, I'm going to pause the video for a minute until he comes back. Okay, so back again with heads up against Mike Peezy. Looks like I let out half pot with top pair here. Which, since I haven't done that in a while, is not my favorite play. But it's not too bad. I can afford to balance it on occasion with a good hand. I just think that, like I said, he gives my half pot lead a lot of credit most of the time. Alright, looks like he's away again. Guess I'm just going to pause again until he comes back. Sorry, guys. Alright, looks like Mike has to go, actually, so that's going to be the end of the video. But, thanks for watching.